You might be like, Elijah, why would you consider that an awesome win? It's just East Tennessee State. Well, because you're taking care of your midweeks, right? Now we're getting into the point where we have, projections on which teams are going to be hosting regionals. We have projections on where teams are going to be ranked going into the NCAA tournament. And South Carolina, despite some of the downs they've had this year, are in fantastic position to achieve some of the goals that you probably had for this team at the beginning of the season, right? It was really cool last year when they hosted a regional. They can definitely do that again this year, and they're in really good shape too. And that gives you a better chance to be able to make it to Supers. And according to baseball or D1 baseball, you have the 10th best resume in the country. That gets you really close here in this last stretch of the season to be able to maybe creep into the top 8, which means you could host a super regional if you're able to get out of your regional. It'll give you a better draw for your regional. For example, yesterday, Baseball America had South Carolina at 12, and in their regional, they would have had Wake Forest as the 2, Charleston as the 3. Don't love that draw. Don't love it at all. Now, sure, Wake Forest, I think, will eventually end up hosting. They've got a good opportunity against Clemson here in the coming weeks. And if they're able to win that series, Wake Forest will be building a resume that's worthy of hosting a regional themselves. But South Carolina has a golden opportunity to be able to make sure that that doesn't happen and they don't have to see a team like Wake Forest in the regional round, or giving a better shot to maybe host a super regional where they to get out of their regional. That's all at play, and a lot of it's all at play because you have only lost one midweek game, home game, this season. That one to Georgia Southern, that 8-0 loss really is it. And one of the reasons why your resume looks so good isn't just because you have a really good strength of schedule. You're taking care of the teams you're supposed to take care of. And last night they took care of the Buccos of East Tennessee State. The pitching was good. You had the rocky first inning, but the bullpen came out and did what they're supposed to do in a 7-inning game. They were able to clean up the mess and be able to allow the new hitting lineup, which we're certainly going to get into here in just a moment, because the numbers behind what they've done in the last 3 games, pretty damn good. That's putting it kindly, right? They have been knocking the cover off the ball ever since they've had this lineup adjustment. But last night, the pitching took care of business. That's all you ask of them, right? Your bullpen gave you 5 innings, only gave up 1 hit, no earned runs, and a 5-3 strikeout to walk ratio. And the best part is that none of your relievers pitched more than an inning or more than 25 pitches. And Garrett Gainey had the highest pitch count total at 25, and that's because he struck out all 3 batters he faced. That's pretty good. That means you're going to be going into this weekend series against Missouri, a lot of arms at your disposal. And that's good reps for your bullpen. And now going back to the hitting, look, this new lineup where Mark Kingston has, whether it be on my show with Jay Phillips on Mondays for his weekly, or he said it in press conferences too. He's talked about a whole lot this year about maybe sacrificing a little defense for offense, and that this might be, the way to go. And the best example of a team that's done this in the major leagues is the Philadelphia Phillies. The Phillies went all in a couple of years ago on power in the lineup, being dangerous 1-9, and maybe sacrificing some players who might not, or positions on the field with players who might not be great with the glove in that part of the field, but have great bats. And you know what? The Phillies, even though sometimes it takes them a while to get into the swing of things in the season, they get into the postseason and they wreak havoc on anybody. Ask any Atlanta Braves fan, They're tough to play in the postseason, and it won them a pennant. And that's not an accident. Not every team can pull this off, but South Carolina is. In the last 3 games, Saturday against Kentucky, Sunday against Kentucky, and last night against East Tennessee State, they've scored 38 runs. That's over 12 runs a game. And then it's not just that they've scored 38 runs in 3 games. They're not even complete games because you have 2 run rule victories. So if we do the math there, you're knocking the cover off the ball. 9 innings against Kentucky, 7 innings against Kentucky. So, really, it's 38 runs in 23 innings? That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I think you found something here. And in the field, it hasn't necessarily cost you a ton. Yeah, Kentucky knocked the cover off the ball in the first game. I think that has as much to do with pitching and Kentucky hitting the ball really well. It wasn't like you were littered with errors in the field. If you go back and look at that 15-13 game, you had a couple errors, but that's not the reason why 15 runs were scored. Gavin Costas has a couple errors at third base, but I think you can live with that when you're getting the production that he's able to give you at the plate, which has been pretty solid the last couple of games. And if he's your 9-hole hitter and he's producing the way he has been, which includes going 2 for 4 on Sunday against Kentucky, and then going 2 of 3 last night with a couple RBI, then you've got a pretty strong lineup. And I think I can live with maybe some of the errors that you have. He was asked about playing third base last night. Dave, if you don't mind, cut number 11. Costas was asked about playing third base and maybe what his comfort level is playing it so far.
Yeah, as far as for me, I don't have much in-game competitive experience at third base, but I mean, we worked over there in the preseason and we kind of knew this was going to be an emergency kind of situation. If this guy gets hurt or this guy goes down, you need to fill in. So I take reps over there pretty often. I mean, I kind of bounce around the infield during BP and stuff. I find it fun. But yeah, no, it's definitely a new experience and still learning over there, and it's been fun so far. So can't complain.
I love it. I think it's a great, lefty-righty almost lineup the whole way down, and I feel like,
You heard, Costas right there talking about, playing third base. He hadn't have a ton of reps, I guess, in game doing it, and that might explain a couple of the errors. But he talked about he's practiced it before. They simulate before the season, during the season, what's going to happen if someone needs to fill in at third base. So that there was a level of preparedness that he had coming into the season, coming into these last couple series and this stretch of the season where he knew if he had to play third base, he wouldn't be scared to do it because he's done it before, right? And the errors are one thing, and I think he'll play out of that. I don't think this is just something he can't play. Talmadge LaCroix is a great fielder, and he's awesome at short. He helps out a lot right there. Ethan Petrie moving into a corner infield spot at first base has made some plays so far, right? There was a play against Kentucky where he had to get on the ground for a stop and get an out, and it looked like he's played there forever. He looked comfortable. So I think even though you might be surrendering some in the field, which Mark Kingston has conceded that with this lineup, it might not be the most optimal with the defense behind the pitching, but it's definitely optimal at the plate. Hitting a ton of home runs too. You're knocking in a lot of runs. You're going to be stranding less runners, which is the biggest thing that we've stressed all season long with this team. The biggest complaint during the non-conference play, the Clemson series, early on in SEC play, is that you're just stranding too many runners. But right now, you're finding that the end of your lineup, when it ends with, guys like Gavin Costas who is hitting the ball a whole lot better right now, you're able to score some more runs just because you have more threats throughout the lineup. Ethan Petrie last night mentioned, he was asked about the new lineup. Cut number 13, Dave, if you don't mind. Ethan Petrie's asked about this new lineup and why he thinks this one is so successful.
I love it. I think it's a great, lefty-righty almost lineup the whole way down, and I feel like, 1 through 9, there is not one hole. It's a scary lineup to pitch to, and I feel like we take our walks. We hit for damage, and we got the table setter at the top, and Austin Brindling has been amazing for us so far. So,
yeah, it is staggered really well 1 through 9. That's one thing Mark Kingston really loves to do. He's done this several times this year, where he's had a couple of lineups where it's staggered all the way down through the order. Austin Brindling leading off, hits left. Ethan Petrie right. Noland left. Messina right. Blake Jackson, left. Kennedy Jones, right. Dalton Reeves, left. Talmadge LaCroix, right. Gavin Costas, left. That staggers all the way throughout the lineup, and that can be tough to pitch against. That absolutely can. Gives you some balance. And it's the optimal hitting lineup. And I'm excited to see what this team does against Missouri. And this is going to be a big series, not because Missouri is a good baseball team. They're the opposite of a good baseball team. It's the fact that they're not a good baseball team right now is what makes this an interesting series, because there's going to be a little bit of pressure here. And when we come back from break, I'm going to tell you why this series is important to the resume that you have right now, as well as what opportunity this has for you moving forward. Because this could be a pivotal series when it comes to sprucing up your resume, not because of the power of the opponent, but because you can get true road wins. There's a lot of things at stake here in this weekend series, even if it doesn't seem that significant, because Missouri is not a powerhouse opponent. I'll tell you why as the extra point, not with Tyler Head, but Elijah Campbell, continues. The Gamecocks are traveling up to Missouri, to Columbia, Missouri, take on the Tigers. You can hear all that here on the game. Friday, 6:45 pregame, 7 o'clock first pitch. Saturday, 3:45 pregame with a 4 o'clock first pitch. And then Sunday, 1:45 pregame, 2 o'clock first pitch. And with the way this team's hitting the ball, because I ran through the stats a little bit earlier in the last segment, 38 runs in the last 3 games. These 3 games that have taken a grand total of 23 innings to complete, they hit the ball like this, then there's a chance that somebody can win a lot of money with the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. For those who don't know, every game, $25 is added to the pot, and if a Gamecock hitter rips a Grand Slam homer, you can win all of that cash right now, and the pot is currently sitting at $1,100. It's a lot of money, but you can't win it if you don't enter. That's a fact. So you go to 1075thegame.com and register for it. You'll see it on the homepage. It's the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. We haven't gotten to give away anything this year because they haven't hit a Grand Slam this year. But with this optimized hitting lineup and the opponent they have coming up, I like somebody's chances of winning something. I feel bad for my man, Steven Bessinger, who will tweet at me every time that the bases get loaded for South Carolina and says it's time for somebody to win money. And I appreciate the commitment to the bit. And one day it's going to happen. It's going to happen one day. And when it does, you got to be registered so you can be able to possibly reap the benefits of that happening one day. And with that series against Missouri, look, it's not a great baseball team. And it's not going to be the resume definer, right? You know, like the win against North Carolina is a potential resume definer because they're in the top 10 of the RPI. They're high in the ELO ranking. That is a game you can look at to be one of the best on your resume. Sweeping Vanderbilt is a resume booster because Vanderbilt ranks pretty high in RPI and ELO, and is going to be a team that might be competing with you for hosting a regional if Vanderbilt improves a little bit. That could be something that you could put on your resume and say, this is one of the defining series of the season. Even last weekend against Kentucky, taking 2 of 3 against a team that isn't just the number 1 team in the SEC in terms of record, but they're second in the country in RPI, and they're very high in ELO as well. And they have the most quad 1 wins of any team in the country. This series against Missouri keeps you from adding any blemishes to it if you are to take 2 of 3 or to even sweep it. Because right now, let's look at the resume. All right, it's really good. And it's a top 10 resume. I agree with D1 baseball. This is a top 10 resume in college baseball right now. You're third in the country in quad 1 wins with 12, behind only Texas A&M, the number 1 team in the country, and Kentucky. You have the number 4 strength of schedule, and you are 18-2 outside of the quad 1. 12 of your 14 losses come in that first quadrant. You don't have a ton of bad losses at all, and that looks really good on the resume. There are plenty of teams, even in the top 5 of the RPI, that have more losses in quad 3 than you do in quads 1 or 2 through 4. We're looking at you, Clemson. Clemson's got 3 losses in quad 3 alone. South Carolina's only got 2 outside of that first. And that bodes well for you. That's going to help you a ton because Clemson's got a resume that, according to D1 Baseball, is a top 4 in the country. That's a team that will potentially be hosting Supers. It's a team that's 4th in RPI. That part of South Carolina's resume is the envy of a lot of teams that are right outside the top 10 in RPI or that are also inside the top 10 in RPI. And at the end of this weekend, if you're able to sweep Missouri, that puts you at 21-2 in your games outside the first quadrant. That looks pretty good because Missouri is going to be a quad 2 series. Barely, because their RPI is pretty bad. They're flirting with being outside the top 100. But because they are in the top 100, you're playing them on the road, this is going to be a quad 2 series, which South Carolina has surprisingly only played 1 quad 2 game this season. But you can't lose this, right? I mean, one of the biggest blemishes on Florida's resume right now, and one of the reasons they are fighting for their life, they are not going to be hosting a regional. They are going to be scrapping and clawing to get in, just to be able to play postseason baseball. They're barely above 500, and you know what? They wouldn't have to worry about it if they didn't get swept at Missouri earlier in the season. This is a very winnable series because Missouri is not a very good team. Look, this is the worst hitting team in the SEC. And don't just take my word for it. Take the numbers for it. They're last in a lot of things. I'm not going to reel off numbers, but I'm just going to tell you what they are last in the SEC in. And buckle up because it's a lot of things. The Missouri Tigers are dead last in batting average, in runs, in home runs, in RBI, total bases, slugging percentage, strikeouts, on base percentage, and they're tied for last with Ole Miss in doubles. That's a lot of batting categories. And I challenge you to find batting categories that I did not mention in that group, because that's almost every single major counting stat that you could possibly think of in terms of a hitting category. Missouri's last in. They don't score a lot of runs. And when it comes to pitching, they're not going to have anybody that's going to be winning future Cy Youngs, right? Like Max Scherzer ain't walking through that door anytime soon. This is a team that they might not be last in a lot of those same statistical categories like they are in hitting, but they have an ERA of 5.63 as a team. It's pretty disgusting. It's bad. It's bad. And that's why this team has the record that they do. Under 500, not Auburn bad. Surprisingly, Auburn has been able to, out-poo them on the field, but still pretty bad. This is a series you got to be able to win. You got to take advantage of. You got to be able to stack road wins, because the one thing, if you do look at all the teams in the RPI and you look at South Carolina's resume, the one thing they are lacking in a lot of, or I guess the biggest thing that they're lacking, is true road wins. They have 6, and it's more than Georgia and Tennessee. But if you look at the rest of the top 10 and the top 20, you're bottom half of the pack in terms of just raw road wins. For example, Kentucky's got 14. Texas A&M has 7. Clemson even has 9. East Carolina's got 13, and that's one of the reasons why their resume is so good, is because they are good at winning away from home. And then outside the top 10, teams like Wake Forest and Virginia have more, at 10 or more. So you got to be able to stack some true road wins to be able to continue to strengthen this resume, and this is the perfect opportunity to do it. And look, I understand Como can be a weird place to play. I know that it's not like other SEC schools where this time of the year it's not as warm as it is elsewhere. And when Florida played them earlier in the season, you could say it was cold. It was a cold series. Not something that Florida is accustomed to playing in baseball. And that's why it can be weird. And sure, they don't get a ton of fan support. They're not backing the place out. So it can be weird playing in a mostly empty stadium. But this is not some mythical land where gravity doesn't exist and the rules of the game all of a sudden change because you're playing in Columbia, Missouri. You're still playing baseball, and you are a good baseball team, and they are not. It's pretty simple. It's May. I looked at the weather in Columbia, Missouri this weekend. We're going to have highs in the upper 70s. There might be some rain Saturday. I think a 30% chance. So that might affect the game Saturday in terms of when it's played. But you got to win this series, and you got to keep this resume clean. And this is one of the best chances you have at a sweep left on your schedule, because it's not getting easier after this. This is the easiest part of your schedule in terms of a series until the end of the season, because you're going to be at Winthrop. Not a great team, but it's going to be on the road. So that's a chance for another true road win. And then you have 3 games against Georgia here at home to end out the regular season games at Founders. That's a top 10 team in RPI. And then you end the season at Tennessee, who is number 3 in the country and number 8 in RPI, and a team that might be one of the best hitting teams in all of college baseball. It's going to be a tough series, especially on the road. So this is an opportunity here to be able to stack wins, stack road wins, and be able to put yourself in an optimal position to get that resume to the point where you can maybe squeak into the top 8 and give yourself a chance to maybe host supers if you're able to get out of the regional. I know we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, but it's resume building season. And this is when these resumes are going to be a whole lot more scrutinized heavily than they normally are throughout the year. This is the time of the season when this type of stuff matters the most. A sweep would give you a 5-game winning streak. It would give you a 21-10 record outside the quad 1. And most importantly, a sweep gives you a 9-6 record in true road games. Not only is that above 500, but that would put you well above some other teams in the RPI and strengthen a part of your resume that you might consider weaker compared to other teams that are ranked in similar fashion as you. Don Staley was on yesterday with Tyler, Wes, and Chris, and there were a lot of interesting things that they got into, a lot of interesting scheduling things that made some news. We'll react to some of that as the Extra Point rolls on. Yeah, speaking of the hardwood, Don Staley's team is pretty good on the hardwood and has been for the last few years. And they've built themselves a nice little dynasty. She's turned her coaching career into one of the best in the history of the sport and is on an incredible trajectory right now. And they're doing things that only a handful of teams in the history of the sport have done. They did something this past year that only 9 other teams have done in the history of the sport, and only 4 other programs have ever done, and that's go undefeated and win a national title. And she's busy. Dawn has been very busy lately, and I expect her to be at the Sixers game, cheering on the Sixers as they try to, fend off elimination for the second straight game against the New York Knicks. But she was here with us on the phone yesterday with Tyler, Wes, and Chris in the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, and they got into a lot of stuff, and I want to revisit some of it because there was a lot of interesting things they got into in terms of building the program, maintaining it, and then what you're going to have to follow up. It's going to be hard to follow up 38-0. The expectations here now for the Gamecocks women's college basketball team is higher than any expectation for any sport that you could possibly have. Hard to top perfection. And it's hard to follow it up. It's even harder to follow it up. But they started yesterday. Dawn was asked, cut one, Dave. Dawn was asked if this was the type of success that she envisioned for this program when she took over it in 2008.
No, I really, like, my cup runneth over when it comes to the success that we've had. Although you work for it, you really, we put in a lot of work for the type of success that we've had, but everybody does. A lot of people work really hard, and they don't get one. We're very fortunate to get 3, and you have to again reflect on the type of players, the type of parents, the type of fans, the type of administrators. Like we can't be as successful as we've been without the help from like all those entities, because you can actually, as administrators, you can do some things that will damper your workplace, and you can damper the spirit of people who are in the workplace. You can have fans who think we are they can pick apart our flaws. They cannot like the makeup of our team and not show us the love that they've given us. We've had great players come and great players go, and although sometimes that leaves people to put a dark cloud over our program, but we've been able to survive it, and we've been able to survive it because ultimately, I just want, and not just me, but our coaching staff, we just want young people to be successful. So everything we do is for their success. Sometimes that's believable, sometimes it's not. But I think if you judge us off of our body of work, and that's what you have to judge someone off of, not one bad day, not one great day, but the body of work. And our body of work speaks to just really having good people and treating our players with the ultimate respect. And that's it. We've treated people well.
Yeah, they've treated people well, and people treat them really well. Look, she mentioned a lot of things that go into building a program like this and how many people you have to get support from, whether it be the administration or the fans. Look, I honestly believe that the way the attendance has been at home games since I've started covering the team and since it's been the last several years she's been the coach, and the records that they're breaking with attendance is a huge factor in how good this team is, because the attendance brings in more money. More money brings you in more resources. More resources helps you build teams a whole lot easier, especially in a college sports era that is built on player movement and money acquisition, right? It helps a lot to be able to have the money to acquire the talent and to be able to have the resources to even funnel things into media production. Look, the media production they do for even just like the video intros to games is significantly different than it is for a lot of teams, even in the SEC. Because when you go to the SEC women's tournament, every team, has their video intro before the starting lineups are announced. And it costs money to make those, and it costs money to pay people to be able to put those together. And the more you're able to funnel into it, the more you get people excited about your program. The more people get excited about your program, the more people that are buying tickets and selling out Colonial Life Arena. And as long as that cycle keeps fulfilling itself, you're going to have a really successful program. And that's a big thing. I guess we talk a lot about the basketball things, about acquiring the talent and talking about the players that are on the floor, the coaching adjustments. It can talk all day about how they game planned against Caitlin Clark and how Raven Johnson played against Caitlin Clark. But we don't get to that point, right? If we don't have the support, and if this town hasn't been so good with embracing not just the sport of women's basketball, but embracing Dawn Staley, embracing the players she's bringing in, and that's just how it cycles itself. Look, Ohio State will be good in every single sport it plays because they are the most profitable athletic department in the country. They've not been really good at basketball and men's basketball the last year or so, and that's why Chris Holtman's at DePaul now. They made a coaching change. They'll be good in football forever. They'll be great in football forever because they make so much money, and they refunnel that back into the football program, and the fans show up all the time, and the fans keep giving them money and filling the seats and filling the stadium, and that's what makes them a machine that fuels itself. Alabama football the same way, right? And then, of course, you have to have the coaches in place to be able to get everything else done on the field. It helps. It's a cycle, and this is how this all works. So, honestly, what Dawn said right there rings really true when it comes to the administration's cooperation with her program and the community's buy-in to the program. And what better way to show that your community is bought in when you're recruiting players inside your own city? Look, my favorite moments from CLA this season with this team, Ashlyn Watkins throwing down a dunk against Kentucky, and almost any time Mylasia Fulwiley makes a play in the open court and dazzles the crowd. If you don't mind, Dave, cut number 5. She was asked about Mylasia Fulwiley, a Columbia product, and exactly what she's been able to bring to this program.
And so I'm trying to get her to play in between those moments because that's when most of the game is being played. It is. So once she's able to master what's in between those highlighted plays, we'll create more highlights. We'll create more like not just creative highlights, but fundamental basketball highlights. And that is beautiful basketball. Like it is. Like I thought she grew. Like if you ask her, I always ask her, like, what were you thinking in this play? It could be a turnover, it could be a shot. Like one time, she started off a game where she was just passing. She was just doing a great job at just making the defense forget about her. And then she took probably a 4-shot, right? So, you take a 4-shot, you're going to hear all of our coaches say, make the extra pass. So she comes out of the game and she heard us saying, make the extra pass. And I asked her, what was she thinking? So she said, I had been passing the entire half. So the defense more than likely thought I was going to pass. So I thought it was best to take the shot. Hey, that makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. So I was like, okay, that makes sense. Cool. It is that. Like, she understands what she's doing out there on the floor. And I think sometimes as a freshman, you think she just isn't thinking about that she doesn't have that much depth about the game when she really does. And, for her, and I'll give you guys, because I try to be as transparent as possible and not give up too much information about, what they want to do personally. Like, I ask her, like, what do you want to do? Like, what do you want to do? What are your plans for next year? What are some of the things that you want to get better at? And she said, you know what? She said, when I came in, I just kind of just wanted to fit in and just get the information that I needed. So I didn't really challenge to be a starter. So I was like, okay, so you're gonna challenge to be a starter? She was like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to challenge myself, and I'm going to challenge my teammates to be a starter. And that's pretty mature. I mean, that's the way you actually just, if you look at how she came in, she was feeling things out, and now she's going to take it to the next level.
And that she's going to take it to the next level, and I fully believe she is. I think she'll be the face of the entire sport in a year or two's time, similar to what Caitlin Clark did. She's running a program the right way, a program out west. In football, maybe not so much. I'll tell you why when the extra point continues. Stick around, because after this, it's the Gamecock Central or Garnet Trust Hour, and then the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. But the Garnet Trust Hour is coming up after this. I will be joined by Wes Mitchell and Chris Clark and a special guest. I received word. Demetrius Knight transfer linebacker from Charlotte, started his career at Georgia Tech, is going to be in studio with us. So that's going to be a fun discussion right there, a good addition to the linebacking room. And look, I'm very curious to pick his brain about how a linebacker at the Division I level led his team in interceptions, because he did with Charlotte last year. That is fascinating. So excited we get to know him a little bit and get to talk to Demetrius in the next hour. So stick around for that. Right now, we talked about the right way of running a program and how South Carolina and Dawn Staley were able to build up something. And a lot of that's just how you treat people, right? She's treated the community really well. The community, in turn, has treated her very well and her team very well. But the most popular coach in college football right now, out west in Boulder, Colorado, Deion Sanders, didn't have the best PR day yesterday. And it's a little troubling, and it makes me wonder exactly where that program is going to go next. Look, it's going to take me forever to just be able to discuss or try to explain the issue of what happened. A lot of it has to do with an article from The Athletic, a very well-written article by Max Olson about where the players are now that transferred out of Colorado when Deion took over. Because it was a lot of players, right? It was 53 players. That's an entire NFL roster, right? An official NFL roster only has 53 players. That's the amount of players that left Colorado. To say it would be a mass exodus is not only a gross understatement, but doesn't maybe exactly paint the picture of how radical it is. And even in an age in college athletics that is littered with a ton of player movement, left and right, uncontrolled player movement, left and right, and an NIL era that dominates the sport, 53 players leaving the program is radical. And a lot of the players that were there before Deion got there and were told to enter the transfer portal, or they should enter the transfer portal when he got there, probably didn't feel that it happened in the best of ways. Some didn't really take it too personally, and some have been able to move on with their careers and be able to succeed elsewhere. A couple players haven't been able to find a school since then. So it's a different type of situation. But the article by Max Olson, I thought, was well written and really didn't paint a lot of people in a bad light. It's not a quote-unquote hit piece. It's the reality of college athletics right now. Look, a new coach comes in, takes over. There's a good chance you're not going to be on the roster, because coaches are going to have that ability to just cut you if they want to. Coaches cut college athletes all the time for all types of things. I had a phone conversation with a friend of mine who coaches NAIA basketball, who's been on some D1 staffs, and he was telling me some horror stories about players who got their scholarships stripped away and were told that, the surgery that they need to repair a knee they got hurt while playing won't be paid for by the school because they're cut. There's a lot of instances of that happening. Which is why I never blame players from leaving one school to the next. And I don't blame coaches for telling players they don't want them on the roster, especially if they just got hired. Every one of these relationships are transactional. And Max Olson painted that picture about all these being transactional. And Shedeur Sanders took, exception to, I guess, a comment one of the players made in the Athletic article. And Shedeur Sanders goes, well, it must have been mid because basically paraphrasing here, must have been mid because I didn't know who it was, right? But this is a team that went 4-8. Look, treating people that leave your program kind of leaves a good reflection on you. Being petty online is a bad reflection, right? It shows that maybe there's not a good culture there of team building and, I don't want to say team bonding, but you got to be able to have some of that stuff to be successful at the collegiate level. You got to have guys like each other. If you're going to win games with each other, you got to like each other, at least a little bit. At least be able to work with each other. And if I'm a player that was thinking about transferring to Colorado and seeing, the quarterback of the team and the head coach of the team being snarky to players that leave the program on Twitter, how are they acting to their face? How's the culture to their face? Doesn't bring off a good look. And look, Colorado's good for the sport. Deion Sanders is awesome for the sport of college football. Colorado is interesting. This is the most interesting 4-8 football team in the history of collegiate athletics. they're great for the sport. It's a ratings, revolution. It's a perfect experiment on mass roster turnover and seeing how well that works at this level. I love teams like that. I love teams that take a different approach or embrace something modern and new things that you can do in the sport, like cut 53 players and bring in a whole bunch of new ones and try to recreate from there. I just wish you weren't so snarky online to players that leave and give a bad public perception of how poorly you treat some of your former players. Not a good way to go about it. It's a terrible look, especially when you were 4-8 last season and you fell off a bleeping cliff once you got into conference play. Garnet Trust Hour coming up next. I'll be here with Wes and Chris and new Gamecock linebacker Demetrius Knight. Stick around.